Welcome to the Nejajuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our discussion of Shao Jung Cheng Fu's eldest son. We look at Bruce Francis's description of Yang's class, specifically focusing on the push hands portion of Yang's training. Then we return to our discussion of the Tai Chi classics, where we discuss the notion of lifting the head and sinking the Qi into the Dantien. And in this week's Patreon episode, we continue our discussion of the microcosmic orbit from Deng Dao's book. Then we return to Baihua's book, where he discusses three major concepts from Tai Chi Chuan. Internal connections, sometimes referred to as the six harmonies, although he goes into a lot more than six. Liu Tong Si Qua, which is wrapping the pelvis and sinking the Qua. And Hong Shung Ba Bei, which is raising the spine and dropping the chest. And just a reminder, if you want an extended episode as well as a bonus episode, go over to our Patreon and sign up, and you can get that as well as all our interviews and bonus content and a whole bunch of other stuff. So as always, thanks again for listening. Thanks for your support. We couldn't do it without you guys. Take care of yourselves and be well.
Today we're going to talk more about Shao Jung, the son of Yang Cheng Fu, part of the famous Yang family of Tai Chi Chuan. Looking again at the power of internal martial arts, where B.K. Francis tells the story of his training with Shao Jung. It's pretty good. There's some good details in here and good descriptions that kind of captures some of the feeling of what was going on in his class at the time. Here's a little interesting piece that he mentioned. He said, on another occasion, several of the students in his school had recommended that I go to a Taoist to learn about meditation, and I asked Shao Jung if he taught that also. He replied that he did not, and the members of his family had not from the beginning. He taught the martial and Qigong aspects of Tai Chi, and if my interest is in meditation, I would need to look elsewhere. Another time he told me that he taught his family's Tai Chi tradition because of the obligation to pass that tradition on. He admired the love and joy of martial arts that his great-grandfather had possessed. Generally, Yang students were well-educated, and some spoke English as well as Cantonese. Many with whom I talked were friendly and insightful individuals. The conversations were enjoyable. So that's a little bit about what it was like at the school at the time. But yeah, he mentions that meditation's not technically part of the repertoire, which was interesting because earlier we had heard how Shao Jung had the most complete Tai Chi system of all, right? Like you got the inner door teaching was what that we had heard in a different bio.
Right. Well, I don't think most schools don't have meditation attached to them. So,
like official Taoist or Buddhist meditation. It's a meditative mindset.
Liu Hongzhi did Taoist meditation before he met Wu Jianchuan. Mm-hmm. Wu Jianchuan also did Taoist meditation, so they were able to have conversations about it and things like that. And Leo just kind of adapted the stuff that he knew.
He was interested in that,
yeah. Yeah, he just adapted the Bagua meditation to Tai Chi, which isn't technically the Tai Chi, but
close enough. But yeah, there is a natural connection to Taoism, like the Tai Chi symbol, after all, is a Taoist symbol, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of similar language. And Baihua often turns to the Tao Te Ching a lot of times and quotes Lao Tzu in the book as well, talking about all these yin and yang and Tai Chi symbology within meditation.
I guess in my mind, those are sort of two different subjects, right? There's Taoist theory and Taoist Neigong is a separate thing from Taoist meditation, even though they use a lot of the same language and the same,
right. As we've seen on this podcast, right? Some of the language and terminology are the same. And
so, when that's where it depends on how you define meditation, but I'm pretty sure in this case Bruce is referring to just classical Taoist sitting meditation,
Right.
not, some other form.
That's
of
emphatically not part of Tai Chi.
Right.
So now he moves on to what is most famous at Yang Shao Jung's school, which is the push hands. So he says, there were always people pushing hands when you came in. He said they did a form of static push hands where both people would stand facing each other in a press forward position without moving or yielding. The person who was facing the wall would attempt to discharge, uproot, and then slam the other against the wall with minimum or no obvious external movement. Meanwhile, the person with his or her back against the wall would attempt either to absorb the other's power or to push the opponent only an inch or two. If you pushed any more than that, the person pushed would land in the laps of those in the small waiting vestibule. Which is funny. So you just had this tiny little sort of closet-sized space to do push hands.
Only one person can really push, because if the other guy pushes, it's going to slam you.
That's pretty funny. But that's an interesting type of push hands. That's not like your average yielding, turning back and forth type of push hands.
Right. Well, it's static, right? So it's like mostly you're just working on the loading up and pressing from a static position.
So we use the pung posture where you come up like that?
Well, it's G, but...
Oh, G with one hand. Yeah,
so,
two hands.
So both, your wrists are crossed, and it's just kind of who can, without letting off, without letting go physically, who can, get something to push on and then discharge.
Right, because like all the stuff we've been reading about is like avoiding the enemy's pressure, like don't give them anywhere to land on. Yeah, but here you're forced to like put your hand up and you start right at the worst position, kind of like clashing.
Right, so this is where you have to learn how to neutralize essentially without yielding, right? So you're not yielding to the person's force when they push on you. You either have to, figure out a way to ground it, or you can, return the, kind of time it where you're pushing back against their push so that you sort of, neutralize their push by equalizing in the other direction, right? But, neither of those involves moving back physically. And I think this was part of, I doubt it was the whole thing that he taught, but I'm guessing it was a big part of it, just in terms of a lot of Tai Chi people kind of are, from one perspective, a little too soft, and there's a little bit too much of that sort of just collapsing. And so I think he's probably working on getting just people to be able to have some structure first before you start doing the yielding and the soft stuff.
He says that Yang's small, thin wife loved to do push hands with the waiting students, bouncing them against the wall. And that's nice. A pretty small area, but she's just anybody's hanging around.
Well, if you got a wall behind you, you can just bounce the person off the wall and they come right back to you.
Right.
It's kind of like, playing racquetball or something. Yeah.
So, and he mentions that he hadn't seen this type of not yielding push hands. It was different from what he was used to. And eventually he got a chance to do it with Mr. Yang. So, when I came in, Yang was practicing with students in the main teaching room. He was putting his hands on their shoulders and bouncing them vertically in the air, always with a wide smile on his face. It was a small class of only 6 or 8 people. In the waiting area, I asked one of them to do push hands. He showed me the 2-person press method and explained it was used to develop the ability to discharge, or fa jin. I was able to more or less neutralize him. Then he said I should really go for it. And then I learned, pretty soon I was throwing him against the wall again and again. So he says, when Yang was done with vertically bouncing people in the other room, we all lined up against the wall in the main room and practiced the technique. Again, I turned, yielded, and turned and countered. Then it came my turn to push hands with Yang. His power was significant, and he easily bounced me after I yielded. Then, as I next attempt to yield, he held me fast with only his palms, locking me up tight so that it was not possible to yield or move my limbs or body in any direction or exert any kind of power against him in any way. It was like being held by a magnet. Due to circumstances beyond my control, I unfortunately had to leave Hong Kong shortly thereafter. The straitjacket experience with Yang remained forever embedded in my mind.
Well, that's that pressing down thing of like, you kind of get this sense of just being trapped against the floor, kind of. And I think that, that straitjacket effect it just like gets you to where you're kind of tied up.
To like cross press.
Well, yeah, but it's more like you're just off balance and in a weird position, so there's a constant pressure on you. So since there's this constant pressure on you, you can't really adjust, because if you move at all, you're gonna fall over.
Lose your balance. Right? And the other, like when you feel that the person has you sort of like Play-Doh, they're like smushing you one way or the other.
Yeah.
And you keep losing your balance and not being able to quite recover And it's they could happen in push hands or Rosho and Bagua, and you can just feel somebody's like kind of got your number and they're just connecting and moving you. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a subtle part to it, which is, Bob talked about training with Fu Zhongwen, another one of Yang Chengfu's students, and he said that he had a similar thing where, as soon as you just touched the guy, his pung was so big that like you would just kind of get sort of bounced off of him even before he did anything, because it was just like, there was just like so much puff, to the guy that like it's like pushing on it. Yeah, exactly. Just like pushing on this light that's coming out of something.
Pushing on a yoga ball or something.
Well, right. Well, it's more than pushing on a ball, because it's like the ball is pushing back, right? So it's not the ball just
more like a tire,
right? Or a tire that's expanding, more like, that it's getting fuller when you push on it. That if you can exactly match the force that's coming into you, right, with a little bit of pressure, then effectively there's no force, because you've neutralized it, right? At that point, anything you do is going to move that thing that's touching you. So the magnetism essentially is the result mostly of them pushing on you and not realizing that you've got their root, essentially. Right? So the thing of just pushing in a static position is you start to be able to feel whether or not you're pushing on the person's body, or you're actually able to get through to their root, right? And push on the ground, which is,
that takes time to figure out, and you got to try different angles and go through all the different things and trying to figure that out. And
it involves a different kind of sensitivity than just feeling when somebody's balance is off and, sort of, twisting them or shoving them.
This is good for taking their balance. It reminds me of what Baihua was saying about flexion. Like, this is that flexion versus flexion. Now, within that, where's the angle you could slightly shift to
well, usually when you do this kind of thing, it starts to be more about inside and outside, or top and bottom. Right? So if you're pushing with your right hand, you're going to release the pressure through your left hand into your body and down your legs. Right? So you're static in space, but the pressure is still moving through you. And this is a big thing. And I mean, this was actually one of the things that Bruce said that he specialized in Baiwa specialized in, was the sort of opening and closings and the manipulation of pressure inside the body. How to use opening and closings to change where pressure goes and what it does.
And he talks a lot about that in his book.
And he talks a lot about that in the book. And that's kind of, to me, that's one of the highest levels of doing internal martial arts, is you're not doing it from your solid things, you're doing it from your fluids. So you're able to control how the fluids move in your body, and that's actually what creates these pressure changes. And I think that's where Baiwa's thing was. It was about how you create pressure through pulsings and circulations, and that's actually what moves your physical body. But it doesn't have to move your physical body. It could just move the thing you're pushing on. it could transfer out of your body into
someone else's physical body.
So all you'll see on the outside is a very small expression of the push, but the person being pushed moves a lot. So it's kind of like a jack in the box, like it loads up and it boom, it's just the thing it's the touching and springs off it. So the jack in the box doesn't really go anywhere, but the thing springs.
The clown shoots out.
Yeah.
Returning now to the Tai Chi classics, we're looking at the Tai Chi treatise from Uncovering the Secrets of Internal Power and Tai Chi Chuan. So the next quotation goes like this: if the opponent moves fast, I will respond to it fast. If the opponent moves slowly, I also follow with slowness. And Baihua's explanation goes, although in the concept of taking his flexion and extension as my own flexion and extension, the speed of the opponent's movement can be relatively balanced, but the difference should not be too large. Therefore, my movement still needs to be relatively fast to balance with the opponent. If the opponent is slow, I don't need to be fast. I can approach unhurried and occupy the position that is most conducive to control. Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that one's pretty, if you're moving back, or if your opponent is moving back at, 5 miles an hour, you got to chase him at about the same speed, right? And then if he's moving forward, you got to retreat at a little bit faster than him. It's like...
That's that responsive idea in Tai Chi, where I'm not just depending on my own speed. Everything's related to how am I connecting to the...
this is basically just an extension of the previous, statement, right? That the first one was like hard and soft. Now you're getting fast and slow. It's like, it's just...
Right. And flexion and extension, and then you adopt somehow steal their flexion and extension.
Well, steal, I think, they mean neutralize or match it, right?
Or adopt it as my own.
Right. You copy them, essentially, right? So, but it's not copy.
When they flex, I use it against them, basically.
Right. It's like, it's equal and opposites, usually. But
moving to the next section, it says, the principle of Tai Chi Chuan is consistent, although the application varies greatly. So the way he explains it, he says, Tai Chi is born from Wu Ji. In other words, nothingness gives birth to being. Spirit gives birth to one. And it is the concept of being itself. Since one can be divided into infinite equal parts, which naturally includes infinitely large and infinitely small, so it can represent everything. Therefore, the concept of being can be represented by the concept of one. Lao Tzu says, little becomes more, much becomes delusion. Therefore, sages cling to the one and take care of this world. So he's back to the concept of one, which is basically kind of the opposite of Wu Ji. Like Wu Ji is nothingness, one represents all infinite.
Well, I mean, in this sense, I think one just means unity of your one thing, essentially, right? So the idea here is that you're going to be doing lots of different movements, different applications in Tai Chi, but you have to have this consistent principle of what you're doing. So it's not that's what makes it Tai Chi, is that you're always following the rules, right? So it can look different on the outside, but it's got to follow the rules of Tai Chi. So the one is the the true, the right,
right,
the one way kind of thing, or the Tao, whatever.
It's everything on one sort of spot.
So it's like...
So the way he breaks it down is like this. He says, it can be simply explained as, there are infinitely many things derived from this one, which is complicated and dazzling and confusing. So it is necessary to summarize a simple formula and get to the root of the problem. The so-called formula can only be summarized in one, so that it may be easy to grasp and implement. So he's trying to say, if you make it more complicated than that, then you're going to lose track of what you're trying to do here. He says, the human body is also a small world, and the complex movements of the body are also dazzling and confusing. Therefore, it's also necessary to summarize a simple formula. So he wants to create a simple formula for all of existence, and then a simple formula for the human being, basically, making that comparison. And the way he says it is, according to the balance point of the body, set the Dantien as the one, as Tai Chi, and as the formula. So if
Right,
one
so-
means everything contained in one place, then the Dantien can serve as that for the human being.
Yeah, it's the center, or central point, right? So it's the thing where everything else connects to everything else, right? It's like,
So he's explaining you want to use the Dantien as your one sort of central focus, and through that, affect the whole body. And so then he goes on to talk about, that's how you balance loose and solid, open and closed, left and right. And then so now he comes to sort of a conclusion. He says, you balance all this stuff to dominate the whole body through all links and carry out the exercise of taking his flexion and extension as my flexion and extension. And he often talks about the connecting the whole body as links, which is the nine pearl concept that we've talked about a couple of times.
The shortcut, the formula he's talking about is you now can just sort of tap into your Dantien, and the rest of your body will, respond accordingly, essentially, right? That you don't have to think about every single part of your body all at once. Mm-hmm. You only have to think about the one part of your body that everything else is linked to.
And again, he talks of the goal of the exercise of taking his flexion and extension as my flexion and extension. Again, like using the opponent's force against them would be another way of saying that, I think.
Yeah, neutralizing and, returning, or however you want to call it. But it's like where
the more he tries, the more it affects him. Would be the goal.
And
leverage.
Using their force against them is the way it often gets.
Right. So continue with the explanation. He says, at this time, yin and yang are intertwined by one in any link of the whole body. This is the specific manifestation of the principle that there is only one throughout. Therefore, no matter how the opponent's actions change, it must be dealt with in accordance with the above-mentioned principles.
Right. Well, that's the Jung ding. That's the everything is linked to the one thing, which creates this central connection throughout the whole body, right?
And so he kind of finishes this little section by saying, from being familiar with the essentials and gradually understanding force, Jin, then you move from comprehending force gradually to reach the realm of spiritual illumination. So another Taoist concept is woven in here, where if you can get good at these principles, then now you can move on to spiritual understanding, perhaps. Even though Yang Shao Jung said his family didn't teach meditation, so to speak.
No, but this is basically the idea that you can use this sensitivity, this comprehending force, as he calls it, this ability to sense what's happening, this central place inside your body. That can be a container, essentially, to do Nadon, to do meditation, to go to that next level of practice.
I guess you've built up concentration at that point.
Well, he says, at this point, where is it? It's like yin and yang are intertwined with the one, and any link to the whole body. So it's like, all the changes in your body are linked to the one, to the Dantien, and that's, going to create this, like, connectedness throughout the whole thing, right? And then that sort of being one unified thing is what you need to do meditation, right? The goal of Taoist meditation is to unify all your different energies essentially into one thing. So it's like you're working on the same thing but for a different reason. In meditation you're unifying everything because you want to do something with your emotions and your spirits, your spirituality and your immortal being and all that. And in martial arts you want to use that to make your body strong and make your mind quick.
Right.
So it's like
there's some crossover there.
Yeah.
So next he wants to get into a whole nother kind of topic. He says the difference between force and strength in internal martial arts. So again, he's making the comparison between strength, which sometimes we call like clumsy strength or untrained strength, and then force, Jin, or like trained strength that's specialized in some way. So he says strength, Li, is the force from inside to outside, The longer the arm of force, the more difficult it is to control. Now, Jin, he defines, is the force accumulated from the outside to the inside, and it is a response that is manifested externally due to sufficient stress. The greater the pressure, the stronger the response. So that's an interesting split there. Like, my first impression is like strength reaches out, force, Jin replies to pressure with a strong response.
Yeah, I've always liked the political definition of power versus strength, right? That strength is the ability for me to do something. Power is the ability for me to make you do something, right? So there's a parallel. Like, strength is the ability to, like, pick up a heavy object, right? Like, that it's me exerting, my own effort to do something. Jing is I respond to something that's happening with a appropriate response, so that the thing that's happening to me doesn't disturb my center, right? My one. So it's like, if the first one, right? If somebody just pushes down on you a little bit, you've got enough, pulling to keep yourself up, right? Or just, gravity's pressing down on you. You can keep yourself from collapsing, this kind of thing,
So he speaks on this concept. So he says, the performance of strength is one way, but internally loose. The performance of Jin is two-way, but internally solid. Their fundamentals are force, but the difference between them is that the strength, Li, bursts outward and becomes weaker when it encounters resistance. Whereas force Jin bursts inward and reacts outward at the same time. And the more resistance it encounters, the stronger it is. Therefore, to use Jin, you must start with strength and then use borrowing or leveraging strength to practice Jin. So you need to ricochet off something or absorb something or like connect to something to really make Jin work. Whereas Li could just be a punch in the air,
Well, yeah. You need, again, this is like, for the Jin to work, you need something to be responding to, essentially, right? Like, you're not creating the impetus, you're responding to it. So it's like, the water doesn't have a wave in it until the ball hits the water. Then the water moves out of the way, creates a wave, and pushes the ball up, and it bounces back out of the water, right? So it's like that idea of, again, it's just, I always think of it just equal and opposite, right?
And he's presenting this whole Jin thing as kind of the key to what makes Tai Chi so great. So he says, strictly abide by the theory of Tai Chi Chuan as the requirements for movement, and practice repeatedly, so one will have an understanding of Jin to correctly understand the reaction of the inward accumulation of force, and can increase its effect. One can strive for perfection. However, if you don't work hard for a long time, you can't see it as a whole in a clear light suddenly. It can be seen from above that the direction and response of strength and Jin are relative. Therefore, to practice Jin, it is necessary to start with regular strength. Leading strength to the inside is a complex exercise process, and it takes time to become proficient. Erect your head and store force around the body. Store qi in the Dantien. So it makes a distinction between storing Jin in the body and then qi in the Dantien. Okay, so he's describing the idea of when you become in contact. So when I've not yet come in contact with my opponent, or the opponent has not yet shown his strength, I have not grasped the initiative and the advantage at this time, so it is not yet time for me to use my Jin. But my force has been stored in my body and can be activated at any time. This type of operation is called erect your head and store force around the body.
Well, erecting your head is what connects your central channel, essentially. So like the lifting your head and sinking your chi into your danyan, which is another way of saying dropping, right? So you've got a lifting and a dropping and then a storing.
So he says, therefore, consciously strengthening the Dantien to control this movement is called storing chi in the Dantien.
Yeah. It's like...
So that's the therefore. Here we come to the end. So this has all been an argument in favor of strengthening the Dantien. And the term storing chi in the Dantien is what they mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, essentially, storing chi in your Dantien is the goal of doing any internal practice, right? That you're trying to develop more chi and then do something with it so it doesn't just blow off, right? So you, at the end of every practice session, part of what you should be doing is doing something to get all of your energy to go into your lower Dantien and to, you know, stay there, to like at least some of it to you know, keep it so that you have it to use for later, right? If you just build up a bunch of energy and don't store any of it, it's, you know, what's the point? Like you're not benefiting from it long term. You're just gonna have it while you have it and it's gone. It's like money, right? Like money's nice if you have it, but like if you spend all of it, then you don't have any if you need it, right? And the idea here is like, yeah, you can spend some of it, your chi, to do what you need to do, but you also want to be consistently storing a good amount of it so that you have it for reserve for later on. So either it helps you not get sick, it, you know, keeps you healthy and strong, or if you do get sick, you've got this, you know, this sort of like well to tap into so you don't get, you know, really sick, or you don't get any damage from getting sick. And, you know, it's just kind of your insurance policy on an energetic level.
I think that's the end of this chapter.
Until next time.
Until next time, we'll keep digging into this.
Hey folks, thanks again for listening. Just a reminder, check out the Patreon for the extended episode, and check out Instagram for images to go along with the episodes, and we have a Facebook page as well, so check that out. Again, thanks for listening, and take care of yourselves.